Ryan dijo, algo puedo hacer. Juntó dinero para hacer el primer pozo que se construyó en Uganda. 16 años después, su fundación tiene 878 pozos de agua en diferentes 16 países del mundo. Tiene más de 1,120 proyectos de sanidad y con eso ha beneficiado a más de 823,238 personas. Démosle la bienvenida a Ryan Hreljac.
Hi everyone, my name is Ryan Hreljac and I'm 23 years old. I'm from a small town in Canada called Kemptville, Ontario. And in a lot of ways, there's nothing really special about me. I'm 23 years old, I just graduated university. I like video games and sports a little bit too much. And I like to sleep in on the weekends. But at the same time, I've been volunteering for the past 17 years for clean water initiatives. And it's something that's become a part of my life and something that I've been so thankful for. And I'd like to share with you guys today the story of why I got involved and how I got involved when I was a kid, when I was 6 years old. But more importantly, I think, why I'm still involved today and why I still continue to volunteer and still find time to give back. So my story started a very long time ago. I was 6 years old in my grade 1 classroom. So there's my class, and my teacher on the left there, her name is Mrs. Prest. And it was actually her first year of teaching. And I remember life was very simple when I was in grade 1. You went to school, you didn't get your parents too angry, you played soccer at recess, and life was, it went on and on and on, and that was it. It was very simple. So the biggest challenges in my life were, okay, how am I gonna not get my parents angry? How am I gonna do okay in my report card? And how am I gonna win at soccer? How am I gonna cheat to win? So life was simple, and everything was great. And then I remember in my grade 1 school class, we were doing our annual charity project fundraiser. We used to do charity projects. I remember when we were in kindergarten, we did a fundraiser for cancer, and then we also did a canned food drive for people who didn't have food. So we usually did that at least one time a year at my school. And this year, I remember, we were going into my class and we were doing our Lenten project. So we were all supposed to do something for 40 days to give back. And my teacher said, okay, this year, we're going to do something. We're going to raise money for developing countries, for people that don't have as much as you. And we were very surprised because we thought the entire world was like our school. So we were like, okay, what do they need? And so my teacher was like, well, 1 cent would buy a pencil, $2 would buy a blanket, $5 would buy 5 hot lunches, and then so on and so on and so on. And then she got to the point where she said $70 would buy a well. So that'd be around 700 pesos. And then she explained to us that people were dying because they didn't have clean water, and that kids my age couldn't go to school because they had to spend their days lugging water back and forth for their families. And I remember we were 6 years old, so we were confused. We said, why don't they just go to the water fountain? Like, duh, it's simple. But my teacher had to explain to us, no, the entire world doesn't work like your school here in Kemptville. They don't have wells at their school. They have to walk something like 5 kilometers to go get clean water. And we were still 6 years old, so we didn't know how far 5 kilometers was. So my teacher explained it to us by saying 5,000 steps. And that didn't help because they couldn't count that high. counted the steps it took me to get from my classroom to the water fountain, and I counted 10. I remember one thing that we learned a lot in kindergarten was this concept of sharing, this concept of justice. If something wasn't fair in the classroom, the teacher or your parents or whoever would try their best to make it fair. That there was this concept of equality, that, that the world was equal, or at least the world that I lived in. And that was what we were taught. So to hear that that wasn't the case, that there were kids my age that couldn't go to school because they had to spend their days going to get clean water, and they would sometimes even die because of it, it made us angry a little bit, because we felt that we had been lied to by our teacher. So my teacher, she was nice about it. She kind of just was like, well, if you want to do something about it, you could help fundraise for these projects. So I remember we were deciding who would fundraise money for what. And we were going through the list, and the well came up. And I remember I raised my hand and I said, Mrs. Prest, I want to fundraise for that. And my teacher, Mrs. Prest, she kind of raised an eyebrow. She said, really, Ryan? Because I wasn't the top of the class. I don't think I was at the bottom either. I was just there. I was like wallpaper. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything out of the ordinary. I didn't overachieve. I didn't underachieve. I just went through the routine and didn't care very much. So my teacher was really mystified. She was like, are you sure you want to do this? It's the most expensive thing on our fundraising list, and it's a big challenge. But I said to my teacher, don't worry, I have a plan. I'm going to go home to my mom and dad, and I'm going to ask them for $70. They're going to give it to me, and then I'll come back here and I'll give it to you. So I thought it was a genius master plan, because my parents obviously had money. I didn't have any money, but they obviously had some. I was 6 years old. So I went home to my parents. It's not like I wanted to buy something for myself. I think that was when Game Boys first came out, so that was the cool thing. But I didn't want to buy something for myself. I wanted money for this well. So I thought that my parents would just give me the money. It was a good cause. And then the entire world would have clean water, and I could go back to playing soccer at recess and not care. So I went home to my parents, and I asked them, I said, Mom, Dad, can I have $70 to build a well? And they kind of just, tilted their heads and said, aw, that's sweet. But no. And then they ignored me. And I remember I was very bothersome about it. I kept on bringing it up again and again and again. And it was really annoying, because I wouldn't let it go. And I remember my mother especially, when we were younger, we used to do this thing where we pointed. We pointed at things. We pointed at people. And my mother hated it. She said it was very rude. And she always threatened to break off our fingers whenever we pointed. And I remember we were having a Sunday family dinner. So a nice family dinner that we would have every week. And we were sitting at the table. And I remember I looked at my mom, and I remember I pointed at her. And I pointed right at her. And I said, Mom, you don't get it. Someone just died because they didn't have clean water, and you didn't help them. It was bad, yeah. So I remember I got a timeout, first of all. And afterwards, my parents sat me down and they said, Ryan, $70, 700 pesos, it's quite a bit of money, especially for someone who's 6 years old. And we just can't give you $70 because then you wouldn't learn anything. So what we're going to do is give you a chance to learn, an opportunity. What you could do is you could do chores on top of the chores you already do to earn something magical called an allowance. And then you can save up that money and use it for this well if you're serious about it. So I remember I already had to do things like I cleared the table, I made my bed, I walked the dog, so things that you had to do to be part of the household. But now my parents said I had to do things like I had to vacuum the house, I had to wash the windows, I had to do all these different things that I had never done before. So it was a bit of a challenge, and I remember I started doing it, and it was a very slow process. I raised a couple dollars here, a couple dollars there. And I remember it was a Lenten project. We were doing the project for Lent because I went to a Catholic school. And Lent only lasts 40 days. And by the time 40 days had gone by, I had only raised $25. So I failed. So my teacher was a little bit disappointed. I didn't have the money by the time the fundraiser was supposed to finish. So everyone was a little bit sad. They're like, Ryan, you said you could do this, and then you didn't. And so I was a little bit down on myself. But I decided, I wanted to keep on fundraising. I wanted to try my best. So I kept on going. I kept on doing different chores. I remember the ice storm happened. It was this big storm in Canada where it rained and then everything turned to ice and it basically destroyed everything. So I remember I picked up trees and branches from the ice storm from my neighbors and things like that. And I kept on doing things little by little. And eventually got to the point where I was able to raise the $70. So here's me telling the story in my excellent handwriting. It hasn't changed very much, sadly. Yeah, so then I remember I had this cookie tin, and it was full of change. It was full of small change of what I had fundraised. And I went back to my school to give it to my teacher, and my teacher was like, that was like 3 months ago, Ryan. That fundraiser is over. Like, I'm not taking that money anymore. It's over. So I remember my mom's friend knew an organization in Ottawa that built clean water wells. So I got the day off of school, which was great, and I got all dressed up in my Batman tie and suspenders, which were really cool back then. And I had this cookie tin full of change, and I brought it into this executive director of a water organization, and I said, this is to build a well. And she kind of did the same thing my parents did when I first came home with the idea. She tilted her head and said, that's adorable. But it's going to cost a lot more than $70 to build a well. It's going to cost at least $2,000. So, luckily for me, I still wasn't very good at math. I was only 7 years old. So I said, I'd just do more chores. So my parents kind of rolled their eyes and were like, oh my gosh, we're setting him up for failure. So we went home and they explained to me, you know what, we're not going to pay you more for vacuuming. You did a good job, you tried your best. It won't build a well, but it will at least help out a little bit. And that's great. You should be proud of what you did, and good for you. But I really wanted to build a well. It still was in my mind that if I could build one well, then the entire world would have clean water. That's how I thought it worked. I was still 7 years old. I was very naive. So I remember I went back to my school, and I started talking to my friends about it. I said, this is still happening. We need to do something. And my friends were first said, what? They were really surprised. They were like, Ryan, that was like 5 months ago. Like, what are you doing? Let's play soccer. But I convinced a couple of them. So I remember that was when Pokemon cards first came out. So we had like a Pokemon card fundraiser raffle sale. So it was my first fundraiser in my classroom. And then my teacher saw what I was doing and said, oh, that's great. Why don't you give a presentation to the classroom? And so I did. And then the neighboring grade 1 teacher said, oh, that's great. Why don't you come speak to my students? So I did. And then I remember I did a bake sale, and I did my first official speech to the Kempville Rotary Club, so service people who are older and volunteer in their communities. So it was a whole bunch of older gentlemen who were around 50 and 60 years old, and I was a kid, much shorter than I am now, and I would have been 7. And when I was a kid, not only did I kind of not do anything in class, but I couldn't speak properly. Did anyone here go to speech therapy? Anyway, just me. Anyway, I couldn't pronounce my words. Oh, we got one person. Okay, that's good. I couldn't pronounce my words, and I stuttered. So I gave this speech to all these older 50, 60-year-old gentlemen who, have spent their lives volunteering for their communities. And the words might not have gotten across, but the message did. Here was this kid, nothing really that special about him, who wanted to make this difference. So I gave a presentation to them, and then I remember there was a small article in the Kempville newspaper, my own hometown newspaper, and it started growing a little by little, and I was able